Here we go. Thank you. All right.
We all collectively say got it.
Got it.
I just want to welcome everyone to our new session. Thank you so much for signing up and being with us this morning. I want to welcome Melissa and Kelly. Thank you so much for doing this for us. They are going to talk a little bit about themselves, and there was some information in their bios that I'm sure you saw. I did mention that there will be some surveys going out at the end of this, just so we can get some feedback and get some ideas for sessions, future sessions. We do try to hold several of these per year. As Dara mentioned, we do have one coming up on May 19th, which is connecting with clients during turbulent times, and that will be talking about our life needs assessment. And that is with Frank Ridzi and Mark King. And then on September 8th, Tom and Christine Woodcock-Detter will be talking about plan giving and endowments, and future sessions information to follow. So again, I just want to welcome everyone. Thanks so much. It's so great to see so many familiar faces and names, and please enjoy the session.
So Kelly and Melissa, whoever is, you can go ahead and go first, or you can pull up your slides if you would like to.
Melissa, you want to pull up the slides?
In 1 second. Sorry, I thought they were right here. Give me just a second here.
And I'm Dara. If anybody needs help, please chat me in the chat box and I can help. And also questions and any comments you can put into the chat box, and I will be the moderator for any of the questions. So please just put your questions right into the chat box. Thank you.
Okay, great. Everyone can see that? Good. Okay, so let me just advance these slides a little bit. So this is just, kind of a table of contents, what we're going to be talking about today. And then, we are going to have a quick 15-minute break right in the middle. And then, Kelly and I discussed this, Q&A is between topics. We're going to have a general Q&A at the end, but definitely, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to put it in the chat and, we can get to those questions. Okay, so me, my name is Melissa Marrone, and I have my own nonprofit consulting business. I've been doing this since 2018. I have 3 young boys, all under the ages of 10. So when my youngest was 6 months old, I went out on my own and have been doing that since. Previously, I was the director of the Housing and Homeless Coalition of Central New York, overseeing homelessness in Onondaga, Oswego, and Cayuga counties. And I've been doing nonprofit work since, my goodness, 2007, I believe. And let me kick it over to Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Fumarola. I've been working in grants and fundraising for over 15 years with a hiatus for my kids. Currently, I serve as Director of Development at Center State CEO. For those of you who might not be familiar, it's a regional chamber of commerce and economic development strategist. But previous to that, I was a consultant to the not-for-profit sector, focused on grants development, as Melissa does. So, seeing different nonprofits and understand, different challenges, the challenges that are faced by smaller versus larger. And that's basically it about me. Just been involved in grants and grants development for a long time now. And nice to see you all here. Thanks for joining. All right, so with that, we're going to get started and kick it off. And again, hopefully we'll remember. If I don't, Melissa we'll jump in with each other to have, to see if there are any questions in the chat on each of the topics. So we're going to start out with some grant basics. So for those of you that might already know this, bear with us. But for those of you who might be very new to grants, we wanted to make sure that we got to the very basics of what is a grant. So at the risk of boring you all by reading slides, I usually like to have slides that are, have less words on them, but I know because it'll help you with the takeaway to be able to look at them later. We did make them a little bit wordy. So, but basically a grant is an award of money, goods, or services provided by one entity to support an individual or another entity, either a nonprofit, sometimes for-profits, or a public entity like a municipality. So grant awards are often bounded by a specific goal or project, and they almost always are bounded by some sort of time frame within which you have to spend the funds, whether it be a year or 18 months, or in terms of a lot of government or federal grants, maybe 3 to 5 years. And generally speaking, grant funds do not need to be repaid to the funder. So that's the very basics about what a grant is. And then just an idea of what are some of the entities that award grants. So foundations, obviously, I'm sitting right here at the Central New York Community Foundation, which is a community foundation. And many communities across the country have their own community foundations, which are a wonderful resource for the community, not just for grant funding, but to kind of help build the not-for-profit sector and help achieve, goals to build a more, equitable and prosperous community. There are family foundations that might be started by an individual and are often managed and operated by family members. There are corporate foundations. So while corporations, which is the next bullet, might also, grant funding or donate products, corporate foundation operates similar to another foundation where they provide grant funding to charitable organizations. And then within the realm of foundations, there's national foundations, more regionally focused foundations, and local foundations. So it's basically their geographic scope where they are able to grant funds. So a national foundation, for example, would be the Ford Foundation. They fund nationally. They tend to fund national initiatives, though. So it would be very unlikely that a small organization located in Syracuse, New York would attract a grant from the Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation would most likely, a lot of times they work with national organizations that, are doing more systems change work rather than supporting specific projects on the ground. While that's not, it doesn't mean that they have not done that. It's usually focused on a more, building a more national change. So regional and local foundations, those are the foundations that are going to focus on the area in which they're located. So our local foundations here, we have a slide coming up later that just has a list of, the major local foundations here. And then I think we all need to make sure we're muted. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. All right, so next, corporations. So corporations will provide grant funding sometimes, and sometimes they will do this from their headquarters. Sometimes they will do this from their branches. So for example, trying to think of a good example. Actually, that's a foundation, so that's not a great example, but there might be, and more, can you think of off the top of your head, Melissa? I was gonna say Walmart, but that's the foundation.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking like Home Depot. Right. They do some of that stuff where, it comes directly from like the clay, Home Depot or whatever.
Right. And then, the national headquarters themselves might have more nationally focused grant programming. And then public entities, those are government grants, so whether federal, state, or local. Many smaller nonprofits probably don't have the capacity yet to apply for many federal grants, but sometimes you might be a partner on a federal grant where if there's another not-for-profit that might be applying. So that's always something to think about, is to stay connected to your local not-for-profit community, because if there is a larger grant being applied for, it's oftentimes helpful to have some smaller organizations that have, provide services within a certain niche that might fit with that particular grant. And then there are community membership organizations such as Rotary clubs and Masonic societies that might also be able to donate or grant funds to organizations. So that's pretty much, it's certainly not exhaustive, but a good sense of what the categories are for types of grant funders. So then I thought I'd talk just a little bit more about the government grants. What can be considered a local grant would be like any grants that might come through Onondaga County, some grant funding that might come through the city of Syracuse, for example, through their federal ARPA funding, that they had some grants for small businesses over the last couple of years. And then any other local municipality that might be within your where you're located as an organization. And then obviously state grants from the state of New York. There's many different grant programs within the state of New York. There's Department of Labor and myriad other grant programs that the state of New York runs. And then there are federal grants. There's a few different types of federal grants. Many of you are probably familiar with community development block grants. Those are pass-through federal funds that are actually passed through to the locality. So City of Syracuse has their CDBG program. Those are actually federally funded. Sometimes the feds will pass to, a certain for a specific program like CDBG, or depending on what the specific program is, whether it would be passed through to a state and then the state would re-grant. Some of those funds, sometimes they're competitive, sometimes they're non-competitive. So competitive means that you would be putting in a proposal like you do for CDBG, and some are non-competitive or formula grants. Another way to say competitive grants is also discretionary. So formula is non-competitive. At the federal level, like grants that school districts get to operate their programming, those are formula grants. Some of the funds that school districts can apply for, though, are also discretionary. That means they're competitive and that someone has to actually fill out a grant application to access those funds. And if they're awarded, then they're awarded those funds. So that's just a very brief overview of government grants. So in general, what do grant funders typically support? So, there's myriad things that depending on the funder and there's where they are and what industry they're in. Funders will fund innovative programs or projects. So I use the word innovative in that there's a lot of grant funding out there, but there are also a lot of not-for-profit organizations. So, funders are looking to be able to best leverage the relatively small amount, even though we'll get to that in a later slide, how big the amount of grant funding is out there, by looking for programs that are really doing something that might be a little bit innovative. They're based on best practices and they're trying to move the needle forward in whatever that sector is. So in this case, not funding necessarily an existing program that's been, pretty much the same, for a number of years, but something that is a promising new approach to tackling a specific problem. Then there's replication and or scaling of a proven program or project. So if there is something that has been really working and successful, sometimes funders will want to take that program and allow you to scale it. So if you're either scale it to serve more people or to scale it to serve a different, maybe you're going to expand your geographic focus. So if you're currently focused on the city of Syracuse, and maybe you want to expand out to the county and beyond. So, a funder might be interested in scaling that. And then replicating would be to take that program and replicate it into another geography. Then there are capital projects, which are essentially if you want to build something. So you want to build a new facility or add on to a facility. Marketing campaigns, if you need to market your services. Organizational capacity building. So some of our local foundations here do provide those types of grants, and it's essentially it's essentially taking your organization to the next level, funding you so that you can either meet a new need or just essentially build the organization's capacity to better serve their mission, and that can take various forms. Then there's general operations, general operating support, and this is probably one of the most difficult things to fund. It depends on the funder, of course, but general operating just means that a funder would provide you with a grant award that could basically support any cost in your organization. It wouldn't be focused on a specific project. So you could use that to fund essentially your bottom line, anyone who works at your organization, and it's not restricted to a specific project or program. But a lot of funders, as I said at the beginning of this, really are looking to fund programs or projects that are promising or demonstrating success so that they can be scaled and replicated across the area. And then things like feasibility studies, if you're, looking to start something new and you just want to see, what the demand might be, a feasibility study, some funders will fund that, and also research. So that's, again, not exhaustive, but a pretty good list of the types of projects that grant funders will fund. So just briefly, corporations would typically give dollars, obviously a grant, actual funds. They might be able to donate in-kind services. There's a lot of corporations now that are very focused on their social responsibility. And I think in order to attract employees, it's actually helping them to attract talent by having programs where their staff can go and actually volunteer with local organizations. So I would certainly encourage any of you that think that you might have opportunities for corporate employees to come in and help out your organization to definitely look into that. And then there are product donations. Sometimes, if that's relevant to your organization, they certainly have knowledge and resources, certainly from their staff or connections that they might help you make. And then some of them will have matching gift programs. So if an employee of theirs donates to your organization, the company itself will match that donation. So you would essentially double or some sort of percentage receive the employee donation plus the company's donation. So foundations, pretty simple. What do they typically give? Certainly dollars in the form of grant funds. And then they also are a really great resource of knowledge and, can help walk you through, maybe the landscape, the not-for-profit landscape, the funding landscape. Also, certainly the community foundation are very knowledgeable about the entire sector and specific issues. And they can definitely serve as a great resource to talk you through maybe whatever challenges your organization might be going through, or if you're, just thinking about a new program, they really do have a wealth of knowledge because of the extent to which they understand the not-for-profit sector here and really know the other organizations, and they can also help you collaborate and network with others.
And they have giant scissors.
And they have giant scissors. Okay, so how much grant funding is out there? So I like to put this in, not to discourage anybody, but just to kind of like give a sense, a general sense. And, you know, this is in the most general terms and some really basic math here. But so essentially, so this is the charitable giving by category in 2020. And this is in billions of dollars in the United States. So as you can see, by far, individual giving from everyday people is, you know, significantly more than foundations, corporations, and bequests, which would be people leaving funds in their wills. And I say that to encourage people to start to not only think about grant funding, but if you don't already have an individual giving program, to start thinking about that too, because that is a great resource for generally unrestricted funding, meaning that it can support your bottom line, where grants might be more appropriate for a specific project or program funding. So within that, you know, if you look at foundations and corporations together, it's about, you know, it's about a third of the individual giving. And on the right hand side of the slide is just a basic data point that there are about 1.6 million not-for-profit organizations in the United States. So if we take those two data points together, you'll see on the next slide, I did some very basic math. And, you know, take this a little bit with a grain of salt, because who, you know, not-for-profit organizations might also, you know, within that category include some organizations that might not necessarily go out for grant funding. But in general, if you do the math, you're looking at an average grant per year of about $66,000 per not-for-profit organization. So while there are billions of dollars out there in foundation and corporate giving, at the end of the day, when you look at how many not-for-profit organizations there are, there's a lot of competition for those dollars. And you can understand why foundations would be looking for new and promising and really, you know, potentially successful or already successful programs to the support, so that other organizations, either within that locality or across the country, could take those on and kind of, you know, be able to achieve even better outcomes. So foundations like to be strategic in where their dollars go, because at the end of the day, there really isn't as much money, even though it seems like a huge number, to go around for all the not-for-profits out there. So just a little bit of level setting to understand how competitive it really is. So I can stop there quickly. Dara, are there any questions that anyone has that's related to what we just talked about?
Yeah, we do have a question from Marjan, and I was not sure if Marjan might want to come on and ask a little bit more to the point. Marjan, are you there?
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Hello.
And thank you for doing so.
Sure.
I believe also I am lucky to know Kelly from the FM school, if I'm not wrong.
That's right.
I mean, my question is that once I'm very beginner, I'm educating myself from A in this whole program. So once you build up a nonprofit organization that remains forever, so I don't know if you can scale it up. I believe I heard from you that you might be able to do that, but I'm not sure. So let's say I'm starting from a little small nonprofit organization, let's say whatever, for health. And then I want to include other services. And then it can be even at a higher scale, and not only a regional or community, but to the state and then national. So is this possible from the very beginning, one small nonprofit, or at each time you have to create a new one?
No, I mean, any not-for-profit can grow as big as the community will allow it to. So you wouldn't have to redesignate yourself as another not-for-profit unless there was some other, specific circumstance where it made sense, but basically you can take your not-for-profit wherever it's going to go. And if you are able to attract funding that allows you to grow and hire new staff and, increase the amount of services that you're offering the community, then as far as I know, you shouldn't be able, you should be able to keep the exact same designation that you have as a not-for-profit, and then just grow based on the community need.
So even different services can be changed, like, you can add on, or you can more or less transform the nature of the services you provide.
I think you do have to stick with the mission that is listed in your bylaws. So when you start a not-for-profit, you're going to have, your mission that is actually listed in your corporate documents. The actual mission statement that you might put out on a website can change from that, but it has to focus on what you were originally incorporated as a not-for-profit for. So if if it substantially changes from that, then you may need to, I believe that you can actually change that rather than shutting down the not-for-profit and starting a new one, unless it's really a really big change. I don't know, Melissa, if you have any other insights.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if it's similar in nature, I would look for capacity building grants. And, lots of foundations have capacity building grants. I worked with a nonprofit who wanted to kind of branch out and serve more than Central New York. And so, we looked for a lot of capacity building grants in other regions and other states to help kind of, build that program and be more attractive to, more of those national foundations that Kelly was talking about.
Yeah. So I think if you stick with the basic premise, you're okay with the, whatever designation you have right now. If you want to significantly change it, then that might be a conversation that you need to have with the state or the IRS in terms of how your organization's set up.
Yeah, probably, I think it's just more of a legal assistance that probably is needed to make sure that eventually the service can be expandable to other nature, or, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
That was all we had.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so on to grants readiness, getting all your ducks in a row. I like this. This is this little thing that I have on my on my screen at work, just so no one's confused that I have all of my stuff together, because while I'd love to, I don't always. So anyway, so we're talking about a little bit about grant readiness, and is your organization grant ready? So I have a checklist, and I'll make sure that because I don't think I've sent it to Dara yet. I'll make sure I send this to you after the presentation, but we're going to go through this. So all of you can use this as kind of a guide for your organization. I will say that I wouldn't want anyone to think that they have to have every single one of these things before they apply for a grant. Some things you absolutely need to have. Others you might not, and it depends on the grant and who you're applying to. But basically, there's a bunch of different categories that I came up with. It's certainly not exhaustive. There are other things that probably people could add, but I figured it was a good place for beginning organizations to start to think about, are they really ready to apply for a grant? So I'm going to go through some of these categories, and we'll start out with your organization itself. So what kind of not-for-profit status you have. So if you are a designated 501c3, that will certainly help you be able to attract grant funding. If you don't have official not-for-profit status, you can always partner with another organization and look for an organization that might be your fiscal sponsor. So most grant funders will require you to have your 501c3 designation, but if you don't, and another organization agrees to sponsor you, they serve as your fiscal agent. And while you would be applying for the grant and would be responsible for carrying out the activities, all of the finances would go through your fiscal agents. So that's certainly an opportunity for smaller or really new not-for-profits. So again, another reason to make sure that you're out there collaborating with other not-for-profits in, you know, around here. So your board of directors, they're going to want to, most foundations will want to know who your board of directors are, and that you have a board of directors. And there's certain, you know, stipulations for the minimum number or types of titles that you have to have for a board of directors officers. It's always good to have a mission, vision, and maybe even some value statements. It just helps the funder understand, and almost all of them will ask for your mission statement. This can be tied to your organizational documents like your bylaws, but they can, as long as they're related, as I said, your mission statement doesn't have to read exactly like that. And sometimes, you know, organizations will go through strategic planning processes and you know, adjust their missions, you know, every few years just to make sure that they're being responsive to the community need. And then, so adequate staffing levels for program delivery. That's just, you know, I completely understand how not-for-profits oftentimes, you know, there are people who are wearing many hats in an organization, or it might be an all volunteer organization. And just making sure that you're not over promising if you're going to be applying for grant funds. Certainly if you are going to be hiring new capacity to work on those new programs that you're proposing, you could build that into the budget. But if you're also going to be using existing staff, just making sure that you have the staffing levels or the volunteers, and you have people that are committed to be able to deliver on the programs that you offer. And then when you're applying for grant funds, you know, many foundations will like you to have been in operation for at least 3 years as a designated 501c3, so that you know, you spent that time kind of building your organization and have been out there performing in the community. So those are just a few things to think about on the organization level. And then think about the expertise that your organization brings. So think about, are you drawing from data-driven, evidence-based best practices in the field? So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with what's going on in your specific fields. Just, you know, making sure that you're keeping abreast of, you know, new initiatives that are happening within your field, either within, you know, here in central New York or across the country or across the state, and just understanding like what's working and what's not working, just keeping up with the field essentially. And it's the same, active participation in relevant fields. If there are any associations you can join, or, you know, conferences you can attend, or just, you know, periodicals you can read to kind of keep up on your industry. And then just being able to demonstrate the success you're having using some sort of data. You know, I think a lot of times we are very focused on quantitative data. So, you know, numbers like how many served, or, you know, how many have been able to do XYZ as a result of your program. But I also think it's really important to focus on qualitative data, because then you're actually going to be learning from, you know, if you're a person-focused organization, you're going to be learning from the people that you serve and hearing with their voice, you know, what's been working for them and what's not been working for them. And you can definitely demonstrate your success by using both of those types of data. And I'd encourage you to try to, you know, no matter how small you are, you're going to have some type of data in terms of how you're doing and what successes and challenges that you're seeing. So making sure that you start to think about how to catalog that, you know, if that lives with one person, or if there's a way that you can set up even in a spreadsheet, just tracking how you're doing, you know, maybe quarterly, in terms of, you know, the successes that you're having. And then grants management. So some of this, so accounting procedures and internal controls, depending on the size of your organization, that's going to look different. Very big federal grants, you need to have a significant amount of capacity in terms of accounting, or consultants that you might hire that can help you manage that. But basically just making sure that you are able to track where the funding is going. If you submit a grant proposal and you're awarded a grant, some funders are going to want a financial report, as well as a report in terms of, talking about the success or the challenges of the program. So making sure that you can track where those funds went and did they support what you listed in your budget. So it's really important to think about, because you certainly want to be a good steward of those funds and be able to tell the funder how you spent the money. And if there has to be a change, that's something you can certainly discuss with your funder, but there should be some sort of procedures in place for making sure that the funds supported what they were intended to support.
I just want to say one thing too, Kelly, about demonstrating success. So, a lot of the times foundations will ask for success stories. And so, make sure you're keeping track of those. I know that there's clients that you serve who, have made a complete, 180. Keep track of that. Take pictures, take video. Later on, we're going to be talking about attachments in the actual, grant portal. Foundations now are asking more and more for video links. So, if you can do like an interview or something like that, those words from your clients who have experienced success, that's incredible. That's gold. So if you can do that, and have kind of a, warehouse for those things, that's great.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, make sure you have the permissions in place for all of those.
Of course.
Right.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah. So culture. I think this is incredibly important for not-for-profits. Most funders really want, not because of the relatively, not as big amount as you'd think of grant funds out there. They really want organizations to be collaborative. So, whether it's working with someone else in your field to scale a program, or working with other partners in related fields that, you can all come together to apply for funding to tackle a specific issue. I think it's important for organizations to try to think about how they interact with the rest of the community collaboratively rather than competitively. Understanding that, of course, you're going to compete sometimes, but I think just having that collaborative mindset that is really going to help you be successful. Understanding that grant development is a team effort. It takes much more effort than you think it does, even for relatively simple grant applications. So really making sure that your entire team at your organization understands that you're going to need the time to develop that grant and work together. You're going to need, you might need information from another department or a board member or, a volunteer, and that everyone should really, try to band together to make this a joint effort. And then realistic expectations about grant seeking. Again, it's very competitive. You might have many more losses than you're going to have wins, and it doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job. It just is the nature of grant seeking. So, understanding and kind of that, you might not get a grant on the first try, but maybe it'll take you a couple of tries. But if you, are really putting out your best effort, if you're really seen as an asset in the community, if you're communicating to the extent possible with potential funders, then you will eventually get there. But just having everyone understand that it might not be a matter of submitting a proposal and then a month later having $50,000. And grant funding does take time. Just the process of being funded can sometimes take months to a year, depending on the funder. So it's certainly not money that might be in hand, within the next, few weeks or so. And then finances, I mean, quickly, again, as I talked about before, having your annual, your organizational operations covered by non-grant resources like individual giving is certainly helpful, because then you can, focus grant funding on new projects and programs that you might want to pilot. Having a fundraising plan is always a great idea. Thinking about the, different types of revenue streams that your organization might be, looking at, and how you can diversify that as possible. Again, making sure your finances are tracked in some sort of way, whether that's internally or with, an outside consultant. 100% board giving. We see certainly enough foundations ask about that. There's kind of there's different schools of thought on this. And some organizations actually have thresholds for a board has to give X amount to be on the board. I think, to me, I don't think that's always necessary. I understand that's dependent on what the organization is, but I think, even demonstrating that, someone gave anything, whatever might be meaningful or appropriate for that specific person on the board. Not everybody on a board needs to be independently wealthy, for sure. And it, doesn't, I don't think, add to the helping guide the organization in a better way. So rather than saying the board must give X amount, having 100% board giving, someone can give $25, someone can give $5, someone can give $50,000. But you can still demonstrate that the entire board is really bought into the mission and really supports the entire organization. So something to think about. Certainly not all organizations are able to say that, but if you are, then that's great.
You got to go with the time, talent, treasure approach, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So different board members are going to bring different, and they should be bringing different assets to the board, like their time, their talent, and certainly whatever funds they can give. And different board members are going to give in different proportions, but they all should be lending at least a little bit of each of those three facets to their board service. And again, so boards involved in fundraising, and there's different ways that board members can do this. Whether it's making thank you calls to donors, or actually going out and soliciting donations from other folks that they think might be like-minded in the community. There's different ways, and depending on the makeup of your board and how your non-for-profit runs, that will look different. But those are just some of the things to think about. And go ahead, Melissa, do you want?
No, go ahead.
All right, and then proposal development. So again, as I said before, you really need to set aside sufficient time to develop a proposal. It will take longer than you think it will, even the most simple looking applications, because sometimes you just have to gather information from other staff or volunteers, or and just making sure that everyone is okay. If you have a supervisor, that they understand that it's going to take you some time to develop that. It's always great if there's someone in your organization or on your board, or a volunteer who has pretty good writing and editing skills. Even those with the best writing skills, like, it's always better when you have someone else look at it, because they will absolutely catch things that you won't, in terms of, like, whether it's just simple copy editing, or if it's things like, well, this section isn't really clear, because in your own head when you're writing it, it's, oh yeah, this is what I'm saying, but someone else reads it and they're like, I don't really understand what you're saying here, or you're being too vague. It's always helpful if you can have another set of eyes on what you've written. And then just having some basic accountability for internal deadlines across your organization. It's really hard. Everyone is busy, pulled in 18 different directions at a time. And, but if one internal deadline gets missed, then it kind of throws the whole process off, and you don't want to be scrambling at the last second. It happens a lot, even with the most experienced grant seekers, but to the extent that you can really have everyone understand what the internal deadlines are, and make sure that they're realistic given the other I mean, you're actually trying to deliver program while you're trying to submit grant proposals. So just having a good understanding on, what everyone's time commitment and what's realistic. And then I just put in some documents and that you should make sure that you have. Some of you might not have all of these, and that's fine. But these are just things that are typically asked for to be attached to grant applications. So you can take a look at those. Some of you, like financial statements, might not be too small to have an audited financial statement, but as long as there's some sort of financial statement that you can attach, and sometimes funders will be okay with that and understand that. But again, we're gonna send this one out, so you'll have all of this going forward after the presentation.
And then I already talked about optional attachments, videos, images. It's great to have those. So
yep, absolutely. So I think
always use the optional attachments. I've worked with so many clients who are like, I don't have anything else to attach. I'm like, find something,
Absolutely. And I think when everyone's just trying to get things in, and you end up like, oh, it's optional, thank God I don't have to do it. But yeah, if you can get your ducks in a row to actually treat that as something, it really is another opportunity to talk about the work that you're doing and be creative about it. So those are things you can kind of think of, and as Melissa said, have on hand so you can attach them to many different types of grant applications.
So much of, I think, grant writing is selling yourself, marketing yourself, and kind of showing off the great work that you've done. So to the extent that you can do that, the better. Absolutely.
All right, so quickly again, so basically before you even get to writing the grant proposal, this is more getting your ducks in a row. Is what you're going to propose, is it already kind of designed and thought out? If it's already designed and thought out in terms of what activities you're going to offer, what are the costs, what's it going to cost us to build this program, it's really helpful, because then you can take that and you can tailor it for each grant application that you might have to fill out. You don't have to kind of invent it as, while you're on a deadline trying to get this grant done. So kind of doing that initial work to figure out what the program's going to look like first, and then, researching grant funders and applying for grant funding. So some of the things to think about that are pretty much, they're going to align with what's going to be asked in your grant application, but these are things to think about. So, I mean, what's your idea and what's the goal? What are you trying to achieve? What's going to be the impact? Does your proposed project align with your mission? And if you have it, a strategic plan. That's incredibly important. A lot of times we'll see, a grant opportunity come by and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to make my, program fit into that because it's a really good opportunity, but you really need to make sure that it's aligned with what you're trying to do as an organization. Other opportunities will come by. If it's not that aligned, it's probably not worth your time, because it would be probably less likely to be funded. What specific need does your project address? Who will benefit? Who is the focus population? And is it informed by that focus population? Are you talking to your clients and understanding what they need and what's working and what's not working, what they think might work? What are you proposing to do? And why is what you're proposing to do, why is that proposed approach likely to work? What evidence do you have? Why did you choose to do it this way? That's incredibly important to talk about. And why is your organization best positioned? There is competition out there, even though we're trying to be collaborative. Why are you the best organization to do this work? And then, of course, how much will it cost? Incredibly important to cost out what it's going to take to run this kind of a project. And then you go into your research and you think about what funders might be out there that would be interested in funding this work, whether it be someone you've already worked with or potentially a new funder. So those are the things to think about before you even get to grants research. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. It's a lot to take in, I know.
Yeah, so we do have some questions. I'll go ahead and put myself on here. We have a few questions now. So now it's heating up, you guys. Get ready. The first one is, and I think I might pull Nikki up for this one. Nikki has a newer 501c3. And Nikki, are you there? There we go.
Yes, I am.
Would you like to ask your question?
So I have been trying to apply for grants in town. And like I said, it's a newer 501c3. It's been about a year now. And the grants that I've applied for, I had noticed that we are a private 501c3. So now I need to know how I make it a public. With the private ones, they're, I don't want to say denying, but we can't get the grants because we are a private one. So I need to know what the next steps are to be a public charity, I guess. If that's the right verbiage, and I'm new to all this, so. So yeah, it's just trying to, instead of private, become public.
So if you are a designated 501c3, you are a public charity already. So I don't know if there's something more nuanced about your designation, but a 501c3 organization is a public charity and should be able to apply for funding.
Yeah,
Okay.
are you
That's what
registered?
I thought.
Are you registered with the New York State Charities Bureau and everything?
I think so, but
Okay.
is it something that we have to do on our end, or is it something that just happens automatically?
Yeah, you do. It's through the New York State AG's office, Attorney General's office. And you
Okay.
can look up using your IRS code and see if you're already registered.
Okay.
But you have to do that annually.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, no, I have not done that. This is annually, okay.
All right. That was good information. All right. Now, another question that we just had, and I think this is a tough one. How can you engage volunteer board members and deal with accountability?
Could spend a whole session on that.
You took the words out of my mouth, Melissa. It's actually a great future topic for a new session around governance and accountability. I think for these purposes, we'll be sticking mostly to grant writing, but I'm going to add that to the list of suggestions.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so Carrie, no easy answer on that one. That is the answer.
Darn.
But I would just say on a basic level, like if you have board members that are willing to, you know, kind of like talk about a grant opportunity, and maybe, you know, if it's a volunteer board, certainly write, you know, help you write, or even if it's not, if someone has a specific expertise, they can help you write, they can review. If they happen to know someone on that foundation board and they can, you know, start to build a relationship, that's certainly, you know, something that your board can do and you can work with your board on. I know talking about fundraising boards, sometimes board members are, you know, really reluctant because they just don't understand or feel like they're going to have to like pound the pavement and, you know, bang on doors to ask for money. But I think there's certainly, in terms of grant development, there's ways that board members can participate in, you know, myriad ways. It's just getting them comfortable and just talking with them.
Yeah, and I would say
still test positive on a PCR test, but if I test,
I think we
you're
lost
good.
you. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and add a spotlight here to Paris. Hi, Paris. Paris asked, is it necessary to be established for 3 years? And what if you're bringing duplicate services into a community? So I'm not sure, Paris, do you want to fill in a blank for me there?
So we have just determined our ministry. I'm pastoring in Auburn, New York, the Harriet Tubman Memorial Amen Zion Church, and one of our Sister Churches in Buffalo has a program that they have that is established. And we've done the groundwork to determine that this would be a good program for our community in Auburn. And so we are going to be I'm working on our 501c3 application now. And so my question was, does that automatically take you out of the grant running if you are not in a certified organization for 3 years, even though you are kind of like duplicating services into a new community?
I would call that a capacity building, right? Kelly, is that your thought
Yeah, I mean,
process?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, it's not hard and fast that a grant funder wouldn't fund you if you're less than 3 years old. It's probably less likely that they would. However, there's probably a couple of different ways you could approach it, where the Buffalo organization could be your fiscal agent. And this is essentially, replication of their program to a new community. And you could work it that way if there's and that way you could look for funders that were out in Western New York or funders here, and I think whether it might depend on the funder who might be the best applicant for that grant. So I would encourage you to, certainly locally talk with some, grant funders here and see what might make the best sense. And they could also do that with their own, I'm sure they have their own funding network in the Buffalo area. So it's not impossible that your organization itself could be funded, but it might make more sense to be funded through the Buffalo organization.
Okay, thank you.
And Paris, I put some stuff in the chat box for you.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, and then I have at least one more, and then we can see if you guys want to keep going or if we take a break from questions. So the next one is Kelly. She wrote, I have a question about conflict of interest with boards and grants. I'm in touch with a nonprofit board that is made up of employees of a for-profit business. The nonprofit is interested in grants to essentially fund the work of the for-profit business. My initial recommendation is that the board needs to be reworked to not include any of the for-profit employees. Is there anything else we would need to do?
I mean, again, I think that this is more towards governance and board development.
Yeah, I don't know that I could comfortably speak to that, and it seems like it's a pretty nuanced situation that would depend. But yeah, again, it seems like governance might be a good way for the community foundation to go in terms of the news program. Those are incredibly, I mean, not uncommon issues, but some of them are so nuanced and specific to the individual circumstance that it'd be hard to comment on it now.
Agreed.
And I bet that Danielle is furiously taking notes. So Kelly, I'm sure that she's adding that. So no worries there. Do you want one more question?
Sure, let's take one more.
Okay. Amy asked, what if you have a nonprofit that supports a program and the program itself receives money from municipalities, county, and state, but the nonprofit needs to raise at least $50,000 per year to support the program, plus any money to expand the program services?
Okay, so is this like a matching fund situation where?
I'm going to bring Amy up here.
So we are a teen center in Cicero, the canteen, and we've had a nonprofit entity for since 2004, but we are technically the program itself is a Parks and Rec program under the town of Cicero, and we get funding from 4 different municipalities. Plus, we get Youth Bureau money from the county, and we get COPS money from the state that the Friends has to match. That is the matching component. And then the Friends of the Canteen is the nonprofit, and they own our building and stuff. But for us to expand any services, everything like that has to go through the nonprofit. So it's made up of volunteers, whereas our staff are actually Town of Cicero employees. So I'm trying to figure out like the best way to approach that. Like, is that a conflict when writing a grant at all?
I don't think so.
No, I mean, the grant proposal you would write would be to support the programming, and obviously the programming is you know, a lot of programming is staff, right? So
Yeah.
I think as long as you make that relationship clear, I mean, there are other friends organizations out there like the zoo, right? They have the Friends of the Gifford Zoo. So I think you can. I don't think that there's a conflict. I think it's just outlining exactly what the grant funds would be used for.
Okay.
You know, is where you go. And ideally, you know, if you could have that conversation with a funder before you apply, that's always great to be able to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, and we can move on. Thank you so
Okay.
much, everybody, for the questions.
All right, so where do I find information about grant opportunities? So there are many different places to look. The IRS actually has a tax exempt organization search. So you could go on there and look for a specific organization, foundation, and you can type in their name. And then you can look at their tax form, which is their 990, and listed in the tax forms are where are the grantees for that specific foundation, so you can understand like what their mission is and the other types of organizations that they might have funded. Another thing to do is to actually look at the annual reports of your peer organizations. They will usually list the foundations and corporations and the donors that have supported that organization. So, you know, a lot of organizations' annual reports are right on their website, so you can take a look and get an idea for what a nonprofit that's in your field, what funders they're working with. And then, of course, if you know who the funders are, you go right to their websites and you can gain a lot of information. And then there's lots of resources out there. Candid is one, which has become a little bit more subscription oriented than it was in the past. But you can certainly look up foundations there. And then there are, you know, a slew of paid subscriptions. The big one is the Foundation Directory Online, which I believe is still free to access at the Central Library downtown. So that's certainly a good resource where you can, it's a database, and you can type in, you know, your specific sector and, you know, the amount of grant funding you're looking for, the region and all that. And get a list of some potential funders there. And then there are a few others that you can Google and look up: Grant Station, Grant Watch, and Grantscape. Grant Station is great. I've used Grant Watch before, is pretty good. I think it's been a while since I've looked at Grantscape, but they're all just different resources at different price levels to take a look at depending on the budget for your organization. So then finding government grant opportunities, if you think your organization is eligible and has the capacity to take those on, you know, looking at this city, local websites for cities and municipalities, county is always a resource. New York State has their grants gateway. And you can look for all types of opportunities, and you can even get alerts emailed to you depending on what kind of parameters you set up, search parameters. There's the New York State Consolidated Funding Application Process, or the CFA, that many of you might have heard about. A lot of it is economic development focused, but there are other programs within the state of New York, and that application process. It's a little bit different now, but it tended to have in the past, and I think it still will have, like a July deadline for like the major CFA programs. But if you just go on you can certainly Google it, but the CFA runs through our regional economic development councils. So our CNY RADC has information about the CFA process. Then there's the federal resources, the Federal Register, which lists all the opportunities and the new, all types of opportunities out there for the federal government. Grants.gov is a little more user-friendly though. You can set up anyone can set up an account in it. And you can actually have opportunities emailed to you, again, based on whatever parameters you're looking for. And then there's sam.gov, which is related to grants.gov. If you're actually going to apply for a federal grant, your organization needs to be registered in both of those portals, but sam.gov has a lot of contracting opportunities, federal contracting, but they also do have some grant funding that has been put on there. They just revamped the whole sam.gov website, so there's a lot more there, but generally speaking, I use grants.gov. It's pretty simple. And then just a list of our major local central New York foundations that many of you are probably already familiar with, including the CNY Community Foundation. So how do you know that a funder is a good fit? So this is where you really need to do your homework. And really take the time to look at the funders that if you went to, you have your list of funders based on whatever resources you were looking at that seem like they'd be good fits, really do a deeper dive into each of them to really see if it makes sense. So of course you're going to look at their mission. I have some feedback. If everyone could mute, that'd be great. Thank you. So each funder is going to have their own mission. So you want to look at their mission and make sure that what you're trying to accomplish really fits into their mission. And then their priorities. Some funders will list specific priorities or focus areas that they have. And your project really needs to align pretty well to those priorities and pretty directly, make sure that those priorities make sense. It'll just increase your chances of getting funded. Obviously, they're going to have a geographic scope. Some of them might only be able to fund in Syracuse or in, central New York, and however they define that region. So just take a look at any sort of parameters that they give in terms of where a not-for-profit or where the work happening can be located. You're going to have to look at, what types of projects and activities they will fund. Some of them will not fund a capital campaign, for example, or they will not fund general operating support. So it has to be a project-specific activity. And then you want to look at their award amount average and the range of awards and how many awards they provide each year. And looking at certainly that 990 will help you. Some of the larger funders will actually list their grants on their websites. But just getting a sense, so if you're looking for a $20,000 grant and their grants are between $500,000 and $1 million, it might not be the best funder fit for you. Again, but if you are looking for a $250,000 grant and their average grant award is $5,000 to $10,000, that's also not a good fit. So making sure that what you're asking makes sense with what they typically give, we'll definitely make sure that you're at least competitive and will be considered. And then you have to look and see if they're currently accepting applications or letters of intent, or they're willing to have a conversation. Different funders are different. There are some organizations out there that say that they only give to pre-selected organizations. And that they don't accept applications. Some of them don't accept applications, but say you can contact them if you have a good idea. So really, think about, look and see what their method of communication is and try to be respectful of that. That being said, if you're connected in the community and maybe, if you have a board member who might know a trustee on a foundation that doesn't, accept applications, seeing if they're open to building a relationship where they can learn about your organization is certainly, a good idea. And it's just, you know, a lot of foundations, they want to know who's out in the community, but they might already have, you know, relationships established with certain organizations. But the more they learn about yours, you might be invited to apply. So, you know, balancing the being respectful of their communication wishes with also, you know, just introducing your organization to new funders, you know, that's important to think about. And then again, just looking at their recent grant history in general, and, you know, have they funded projects like yours, or do they, you know, if you can see a trend over the last few years of what types of projects they're funding, you know, it's important to pay attention to that. And does your project really fit in with what they tend to fund? So those are just some things to think about in terms of fit. And then again, you know, a little bit duplicative of what we talked about before, but this information can be found on the funder websites. It can be found on their 990s. It can be found on these research resources. It also can be found in news articles. You know, the Chronicle certainly has larger foundations listed there, but, you know, even sometimes just Googling a foundation and you can come up with news articles about a grant that they might have recently, you know, provided to an organization, and you get a little more context maybe about what that grant was about, or you can look on that organization's website and see if you can find that program and understand what it is. So doing a little bit of research, if you know, is a great investment in your time, so that you can make sure your proposal really speaks to what the funder is trying to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, each funder has their own mission and they're trying to create their own impact. And by partnering with grantees, they're able to ensure that they can make that impact. So it really is a partnership, you know, in the best case scenarios. And while the funder has the money, you all have the expertise and are actually on the ground doing the work. And, you know, combined with the learned expertise of the funders, because they have worked with so many different organizations, it really is a win-win. So making sure that you understand the funder, and you've done your homework first before, you know, if you're able to have a conversation with them, I think that really helps, because then you can do a deeper dive into, you know, whether this makes sense to move a relationship forward. All right, so we can stop there, because Melissa will take over from here. But are there any other questions before we move on?
There are so many questions. So, the first one we actually got in the mail last night in the email was about how to find out about databases and how to make sure that your organization is listed on the databases. And I don't know if you guys have an idea of many databases or just the most important ones.
I would say the most important one is GuideStar, and really make sure that your organization is up to date on that. You know, 990 is going to be the one that they're looking at the most. So, you know, making sure that your organization's 990 is up to date, and any other information on GuideStar. I'm not familiar with other databases so much as I am, you know, that one. And I know that, you know, foundations are going to look up your website. They're going to go on to GuideStar and, you know, kind of do their homework before they fund. But, you know, I would say to make sure that your information is current there. Kelly, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with a couple of them, not with that specific one that was sent, but like there's also Charity Navigator,
Right.
You know, a bunch of these are popping up. And I guess, you know, while certainly if your organization is going to show up on them, then you should definitely make sure that it's correct, because if it's already going to be out there, you know, you certainly don't want anything to be incorrect. Whether it's worth anyone's time to make sure they're on them, you know, I think that kind of this type of database is relatively new. But yeah, I mean, GuideStar has been the one that, you know, and again, you can look up foundations on GuideStar as well, which is now part of Candid. But I think generally speaking, what I'd say is probably the most important thing, rather than worrying about databases, is to just make sure that you are really connected within your local community. And if you're out there doing good work, making a difference, being collaborative, communicating with your other, peers and with the local foundations, I think that was going to go a really long way to making sure, to building your reputation locally. Because when it comes to grant funding, especially if you're very on the grounds project based, the most aligned funders are going to be the ones that are in the local community who are concerned about the issues that you're trying to address. So I think just making sure that your organization is operating, in a way that's really responsive to needs and is trustworthy and all of that, I think, that's going to be probably where you should focus most of your energy. And,
Agreed.
And worrying about database as you get bigger, maybe that's something you can consider and think about.
Yeah, I mean, I know, definitely get involved with your community. I've even, when I worked for the Housing and Homeless Coalition, I had a number of funders contact me and ask me about specific organizations and their ability to manage funds. So, really make sure that you have strong relationships with your community members.
Perfect. Okay, I like these next two are connected to religion. So it kind of puts them, it's tying the two questions a little bit together, but they're very, very different questions. So we have Chris, who says, where is the best place to find funders when it comes to nonprofit organizations? So we've covered some of this, but it's a Buddhist organization that has a very long history, but it's new to writing grants and exploring both men operating projects and other projects. So
general operating.
I'm sorry?
General operating, not men operating.
It came, I guess it auto corrected to men operating. And I was like,
or my typing, I'm sorry. So basically, yeah, I mean, it's a very long-standing organization, and we're doing a number of things. One is some of the board discussion previous about rounding the cats up, so to speak, so that they're focused and they know what they're supposed to be doing and want to be doing it. And then because everything is volunteer, it is, there is a fair amount of turnover. There's a lot of accomplishment, but it's not so much a material accomplishment as other societal or environmental or social kind of benefit that my task is to try to find a way of quantifying it in some way that is understandable. But more importantly, it's just, I did look at GrantStation and I went through there and I went through all of it, or I thought I went through all of it, and really a very small number, target this kind of an area. And I expect that. But I just want to make sure I was, exploring everything I should.
Yeah, I mean, GrantStation, it's I've been on there before. It's tricky with keywords. Google, you might have more luck with, just to kind of have it a more open search rather than such a refined search. I'm not really too sure about other. Kelly,
well, for me, when I'm discussing with them is how to reframe some of the activity, because, Buddhist is sort of a hermetic kind of a practice in many ways. Mm-hmm. So as well, how to reframe so we launched a program called Engage, but how to reach to the community, how to do things that are tangible benefit kinds of things that maybe people can wrap their heads around a little bit than sort of going off and into the monasteries. Anyway, I a lot has been very helpful. So I'm pretty sure, I mean, what is it, Foundation Center, or the other one, the large one mm-hmm. is the other one we're going to start taking a look at. But I'm trying to, they're expensive. So I just want to line everything up and just buy 1 month and go deep into that.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, if you're talking, I think it depends if it's truly a project that is not going to benefit one religious group or one, persuasion per se, but it is a community benefit. I mean, lots of religious organizations run community programs. So it's just focusing on like, what is the benefit? Who is the focus population? Is it restricted to people who are within that congregation, or is it open to others? Because, restricting might be hard to get grant funding unless it's a religiously focused organization, which there might be, certainly might be funders out there who just want to fund like a Buddhist organization. It just might take a little bit of legwork to try to find out who those organizations are, because they are going to be few and far between. But if
that's of course what I'm finding.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So I think if it's a project that's going to benefit the community at large, regardless of, faith, then I think you're in a better position to try to find
Agreed.
grant funding.
Right. Thank you.
Right. Okay. And then the other question, and this is our last one for right now. Martha is asking about, right now there are a food pantry that is under a Catholic church, and she's finding that as the food pantry has enlarged over the years, it seems like it's becoming more difficult to operate under the church. What do you guys think?
Boy, that's
yeah.
like depends. I guess the question is, should you be moving out and starting your own nonprofit? And that's certainly an issue that you all can definitely discuss. But
yeah, I would need to kind of dig deeper and figure out why it's more of a challenge. But if your program truly is expanding,
well, if I could just interrupt. And I apologize for my voice. I got a cold. Had the grandkids, and it's not COVID. We all got tested. It's just the COVID. But what it is I'm the coordinator, and I like the way it is right now. It's a lot simpler without having established a board and getting an accountant, somebody that's paid to do all of our taxes and stuff. And the church part has worked because they pretty well let us kind of do it our way, if you will. And what has caused part of the problem is that we're all volunteers. And so they're I treat them kind of like a board when we decide on things and so forth. It just works better, and we still are able to get grants. And everybody says, well, because you're a Catholic church, that's a problem. But even with the power plants and stuff, what we've done is the church becomes a vendor, and we file the documents so that the employees can actually designate, let's say, their Christmas bonus to the pantry and so forth. And we have got quite a few grants because of that. So right now it seems to be working fine. I'm planning for succession of someone to take this over. And I think the biggest thing right now is that it got so large that we're trying to find software to make it so people can order online, and it will keep all of the records, so it's easier for if I'm not here, someone else to step in. And so we're trying to do that. But once don't take this wrong, but once you become your own nonprofit, all of the, what would I say, mechanics of having one make it much more difficult to function. Like we ordered t-shirts, and we have a liaison, one of my volunteers, between the church and us. So she delivers checks to the office manager that we get as donations, bills. The church pays our bills. We have a separate account under the church. It's working well, but going forward, like if someone wanted to plan for a capital project or something, that would be difficult the way we're doing it right now. So
yeah, I'll just jump in and say, these are not easy issues, and it's really difficult. But, you know, clearly in terms of grants, I mean, you're having success now, and that's great. You could probably have success without it, but if you need the capacity to remain under the church, it seems like you all need to have like a strategic discussion with your leadership and, you know, sit around the table and really talk about the pros and cons of it. And, you know, that probably would be helpful and guide the organization going forward. So but I can't, I wish I had more to offer. It seems like a really, you know, specific situation.
And I do think it's time for break, right? It's 10:30. So we're going to go ahead and move into a break for 15 minutes. Is that right?
Yep. Do you want to maybe, is 15 okay? You want to do, well, Melissa, I know you have.
About it's
like a 10-minute break. Okay.
You know, is 5 to 10. I'm worried about it going over. I have break scheduled after this section. So.
Okay. So 10 minutes. So meet back at 10:40.
Sounds good.
All right. I'm going to pause the recording and we'll see everybody back in 10 minutes.
So, cold applications, you know, I've done before, but I want you to really kind of think about the amount of time that it takes for you to put together an application. Think about, you know, your staff time, pulling in other staff. It takes hours and hours of time. And if you don't end up getting it, you know, you still have that product that can be useful for other grant opportunities, but you know, you've kind of wasted that time when, you know, you could have contacted them in advance, let them know who you are, you know, talk about the work that you're doing, the funding that you need. You know, I think that's going to be a better bet rather than just submitting a cold application. And then, you know, prepare for your approach. So when you're, you know, when you have your call with them, your meeting with them, you know, whatever the case may be, you know, do your research, figure out what they've funded in the past. You know, foundations, I'm talking more toward the foundation kind of perspective, but foundations have funded really amazing projects, and without their support, some of these projects, you know, it couldn't happen without their work. So, you know, talk with them, figure out, you know, what kind of work they've done, and thank them for it, because they're part of the community. Also be calm. So, you know, sometimes we have this, you know, Chicken Little approach, you know, like the world is on fire and, you know, we need your funding. You know, be organized, have it all laid out, talk with your other staff members about, you know, what you're intending to do, and seek any kind of advice you can. And adjust your style to the funder. So, you know, Central New York Community Foundation, you know, they might want to know different things versus a foundation in Oswego County, you know, so talk with them about the specific work that you're doing in Oswego County, and really tailor it that way, based on geography, based on interest. You know, figure out what they like to fund. And it might be literacy, it might be, you know, veteran specific work, you know, figure that out. You know, you kind of do have to balance the Chicken Little approach, right? So convey the urgency, let them know, you know, listen, we need it by this date because we're, you know, going to have this event or this program starting. And we really need the support by then. And then arrange for that, you know, specific follow-up, let them know, you know, we're having the event on this date, we need this, you know, funding, and we will get back to you, you know, with data and kind of, you know, what we've been able to accomplish by this date. Be persistent, but polite. So, again, going back to that, kind of harried approach, really making sure that, you're letting them know, we need this funding, but in, a cordial way. And so the essentials for any approach, this is more for kind of written communication, in an email, opening, introduce yourself, let them know who you are, talk about the need, the opportunity, because it's also an opportunity for them as well. They're funding this project, it will help them in the community as well. Talk about your organization, who you are, how long you've been around for, demonstrate, the good work that you've done. Talk about, the project, how long the project has been around for, expected outcomes. If you have been around for a little while, you have some data, so you can talk about, this is what we've been able to accomplish, this is what we'd like to accomplish in the future. And then ultimately your request. So, I'll need X number of dollars for a 1 year, term or whatever it is. And then next step. So, when you need the funding by, and those kinds of next steps. So letter of inquiry, I like a letter of inquiry because it's already there for you, so they have the questions all set, you're able to fill it out. It's, in the format that they're requesting. Again, it's the most common. And then most foundations will have target dates. So, the letter of inquiry is due by, May 1st. And everyone's submitting at that time. It's how the process works. And then if you get accepted, you actually get to apply for the grant, and you can use and elaborate on the responses that you put into your LOI. Okay, well, we were supposed to take a break, but we're going to keep going here. Okay.
Melissa,
Yes.
someone has asked if you guys have any samples of LOIs.
I would have to check with past clients to see if they would be comfortable with sharing that. And I can do that.
There's probably at least like a format. Sometimes with an LOI, there might not actually be a format. So it's just a 1 to 2 page letter where, all those things that Melissa just talked about that are listed on that slide, you just write, keep it short and quick, but get to all of those pieces and parts to kind of explain the program. So just even following that guide, and then what's going to come after that Melissa's going to talk about, you could create a 1 to 2 page kind of summary of what might be a larger grant proposal for a letter of inquiry that wouldn't have like a set form from the funder.
I would also Google sample grant letter of interest, and you're going to see some great responses there as well. Okay, so grant application overview. This is just a common proposal, common questions that you will be getting asked. Cover letter, I have not seen so many cover letters lately. Typically that's going to be in your email. If you're submitting it via email, most of the time you're going to see grant portals through the foundation's website or the funder's website. Your introduction, organizational info, and your credentials, how long you've been around for, your, IRS ID number, things like that. I like to have, the organizations that I work with, I like to have kind of a set document where everything is in there. So, your mission statements in there, your vision statements in there, information about each individual program is in there. And that way I can just kind of quickly copy and paste that into the document, or the portal rather. For each of these, it's going to be different depending on your program. So you can be more program specific in different documents where you're talking about, the statement of need, your methods, your evaluation, and we'll get into budget later on. So cover letter, again, I haven't seen too many of these, but, when you're sending off an email and attaching the grant application to the email, for instance, it gives kind of that first impression. You're summarizing the project, you're summarizing the application. Most of the time it's coming from, the executive director or some kind of leadership staff to support that ongoing relationship with the funder and to kind of demonstrate and show, that it's important, as well as, wanting to engage and establish that relationship. The best person to sign, typically, funders want, it's in your bylaws who is eligible to sign for your organization. So most of the time it's going to be the executive director, board president, any other leadership staff. Your executive summary, that's going to be in the beginning part of the application. So definitely link the funder's priorities to your project. I understand that you've, funded these great programs in the past. We are interested in, having you support our program, things like that. Brief summary of your organization, again, need and opportunity that your project will address. These are all kind of part and parcel of a grant application. Okay. And same thing, executive summary, introduction, it's kind of this same thing, talking about, your organization, what to expect as a result of funding the program, key points, and that it connects to the foundation mission. Like I said before, there's some foundations that want to fund specific things, specific programs, connected back to that. Statement of need. So, this is really getting to the crux of, why you need the funding. So who is affected by the program? This is kind of the who, what, where, when, and why. What factors contribute to the problem, what can be done to fix the problem, what your organization is doing to address the problem. And, do you have any other partners that you're working with? What the community is doing? What else needs to be done? And why does it matter? This is where you're pulling in data. So you're talking about, I know CNY Vitals has data, right there talking about, what's done with each specific kind of veteran specific work, domestic violence, all of those areas that you can pull that local data from. U.S. Census has data, look look to other sites and pull in that data to kind of illustrate your problem and what's going on. And feel free to interrupt me at any time, Danielle, to talk about, CNY Vitals or anything like that.
I did put the link for CNY Vitals into the chat box if anyone is interested in looking at that.
Great. It's a great site. It's I love using it when I'm writing a grant. Effective needs statements, talk about your mission again, how the opportunity relates to your mission, relating it to the funder's priorities again. Some of these are kind of, duplicative. Focus on beneficiaries, evidence, again, statistics, research trends. CNY Vitals has great quantitative data. I think if you're looking for qualitative data, you can also look at like Syracuse.com, talk about recent news articles, things that are happening. There's a lot of stuff about poverty on Syracuse.com and national interest in that. Other news sources, things like that. Okay, and then great need statements. So really making sure that, you're not, you're talking about the problem and you're not kind of copying and pasting that into a different part of the application, just really elaborating on it in later parts of the application. But this is going to be more kind of a quick response. This is, why we need the funding. This is when we need the funding by. Here's why we need the funding. It's going to be about a paragraph or two. So here's an example. You can go ahead and read that.
For the captioning, can you go ahead and read it out loud?
Sure. So example of an effective needs statement: our youth have limited access to educational resources. They are mostly from low-income households, and the neighborhood in general is very distressed. We have one after-school program that is well attended, but we need more resources to reach out to reach more of our students. Please help us educate our youth.
And I just want to say here, I think that's a good it's a good introductory need statement. And I think you would expand on that with specific data to support, exactly what the community looks like, what kind of after school program it is, how many students attend, how many more could attend, what's your saturation rate within the community? Are there more kids who can attend, or improvements that need to be made? So I think kind of setting the stage and then adding those details, will make it even that more effective.
So we're going to take you, section by section through the grant application. So organization information, talking about the history and mission, how long you've been around for, what's your mission statement, who you serve. Later on, you will be asked about demographics of who you serve. Your staff, your board of directors. You might get asked about staff bios, things like that. You might get asked, more than likely get asked to attach your board of directors list. Any major accomplishments or future goals of the organization. The organization's capacity to carry out the proposed project. So do you have, the ability to do this, you know, and I think I've worked with clients before who did not have the ability to, you know, carry out the proposed project. And that's going to get you in trouble because you aren't able to spend the money in time, you know, you don't have the data when it comes time for the grant report, you know, really making sure that this is something they are able to accomplish in time. And then diversity. So, you know, this has been since 2020, you know, any foundation that's worth their salt is asking about diversity, and they're asking about it with regard to the people that you serve, your staff, and your board of directors. And so, you know, oftentimes you see, you know, not a complete lack of diversity in those three areas. So, you know, really making sure that you are diversifying and, you know, that you have plans to diversify in the future if you are not currently. So, and I know that can be challenging, but please reach out to, you know, Danielle, I'm not too sure if there's resources on board diversity and things like that through the Community Foundation. But I know that a lot of organizations are really trying to do this because many boards are very, very white. So
Yeah, and we do have a couple of resources. And boardsource.org is also a great resource. They do have some paid services, but they have a lot of free information that can be really helpful. When looking at diversifying your board along racial or ethnic lines, we do have Nourishing Tomorrow's Leaders, and also AGE, which trains, generally speaking, younger people to become board members, to find out what they're passionate about. Often they are people of color, and it's really been a wonderful collaboration with the Gifford Foundation that we've been able to do with that. And just to kind of expand on what Melissa was saying, as far as the Community Foundation, what we're looking for when we talk about diversity is that the staff, the volunteers, and the board mirror the people that they're serving. So the types of diversity that we're looking for, you know, for a smaller organization in Madison County will be very different from what we're looking for in an organization working with youth in the city of Syracuse. So I think if it's unclear, or if there are any questions as you're answering those types of questions, I think contacting the individual funder to learn more about what they are looking for would be really helpful.
that's helpful. Thank you.
And, you know, Brenda Muhammad just asked that currently their board is only Black. Does this pose a problem?
I would say it depends on who you're serving.
Right.
If you're serving predominantly Black members of the community, no, that would not be a problem.
Right. Okay. So project methods. So this is going to be the next section, goals and objectives. So really listing out what you intend to accomplish. Your project description, just, you know, talking about what the opportunity is that you want to be funded. Your timeline. And timeline, there's a lot of foundations that ask for you know, monthly timelines or quarterly timelines. So if it's a 1-year funded project, they want to know, okay, so in Q1, you're going to accomplish X. In Q2, you know, you're going to accomplish Y, things like that. So really laying that out. And I think it helps you have a vision for the project and, you know, breaks up your goals a little bit throughout that 1 year. Your outcomes and evaluation. So what you're intending to accomplish and how you're going to evaluate that. So, do you have a database where you're keeping your data? How are you keeping track of all of that, and how you intend to evaluate it? So, if we're able to, serve, 20 people by, providing them with this kind of support, then you've reached that goal, that objective. And then the sustainability plan. So, foundations don't want to continue to fund your project every single year with the same project, right? They want to kind of diversify as well. So, really making sure that your project can stand on its own 2 feet in the following year, or, if you're looking for continuation funding, it's going to be more like 1 to 2 years. And, making sure that you have another alternative option for your program to be financially sustainable. Okay, and then measuring success goals. So this is an example of a goal. Youth-Right will create and operate a 2-hour after-school program at 2 city elementary schools that improves writing skills for 25 4th and 5th grade students who scored in Tier 1 on the state writing exam. So that's great because, you're actually putting in numbers on what you intend to accomplish. Okay, and a quote here. A goal without a plan is just a wish. Okay, and then SMART goals. So making sure that it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time related. So specific, targeting a specific area for improvement. We are going to fund, or we are looking to fund a food program for veterans who, are have food insecurity issues, right? So very, very specific. Measurable. How do you quantify or at least suggest an indicator of progress? So, if you end up feeding people, feeding is a common program or project, quantifying that. So, we were able to feed 150 people through a food giveaway, that we did. Attainable, assuring that an end can be achieved. So, when you're talking about food insecurity, for instance, making sure that, you are having some kind of sustainability program within that. So, making sure that they are financially stable, that they can get access to financial resources as well, and that you are solving their overall overarching problem. Realistic, state what results can be realistic, what results can realistically be achieved given available resources. So you're only given a certain amount of funding, you're only asking for a certain amount of funding. What can you realistically accomplish with that funding? Time related, specify when the results can be achieved. So, if it's a 1-year time frame, and that's what most of these grants are, 1-year time frames, when can the funder expect to see results? And oftentimes they'll be asking you for a grant report, and we can talk about that later. Okay, outputs versus outcomes. So this is very confusing for a lot of people. Outputs, let me get into that. So outputs is, what will you produce? So this is numbers, basically, the number of graduates, the number of classes, training materials. So 25 students attend the Youth Write program, 123 writing curriculum purchased, 1 teacher and 1 teacher aide hired. Outcomes is going to be more of your kind of qualitative data. You experienced an increase in student attitudes about writing by the end of the grant period, improvement in written organizational structure, increase in punctuation usage, correct punctuation usage. So you're giving out those short-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes. And you'll typically see that throughout the 1 year and even in the future, going past the funding year. And then impact. So what change will you affect over the long term? So as a result of the funding, we expect to see lower dropout rates at the high school, greater participation in secondary advanced ELA classes at the high school, higher post-secondary education access. So what do you expect to see over the long term? And you typically won't have that impact right away for the grant report, but it's kind of your vision. What do you expect to see as a result of that funding, as a result of that support? Budgets. Budgets are hard. Not a fan of budgets. So creating a budget. I always like to work with someone in the organization who, is like a financial director or things like that. Like, they know what the overall organization budget looks like, and they can help you create a strong budget. Most of the time, you're going to have the funder's template for the budget. You can create your own. Sometimes you have to do that, and definitely share. What I like to do is use Google Docs because it's free, and I can share the spreadsheet with members of my team, and they can take a look at it and make changes. So really making sure that your budget aligns with your narrative and your goals, and you're calculating your costs, making sure that you're not going above and beyond, and also making sure that you're not, kind of cheating yourself, that you're being accurate. Sometimes you may need a budget modification going down the road. Things happen, staff quit and things like that, and you may need a budget modification, but that's kind of going into the future. But know that a lot of foundations are pretty flexible on that. So, and then what's allowable, indirect capital. Sometimes a lot of foundations, a lot of funders don't want to fund capital. They don't want to fund indirect costs. They don't want to fund staffing. So really making sure that you're detailing how you're going to, if you're doing an overall kind of project budget, really making sure that you're detailing how you're going to get those other expenses funded. The more full a budget looks, the better it is to present.
I just want to jump in and clarify for those who don't know what indirect costs refer to. What people might be more familiar with the term overhead. So it's basically keeping the lights on and the telephones plugged in and the internet at your organization. And some larger organizations actually calculate an indirect cost rate that they have, that they apply to all their programs. So you know, they can allocate the percentage of those costs that are utilized within a given program. So if it's, you know, 10%, you can just do a broad 10%. You have all of your costs for your program, and then you take 10% of that, and that covers that program share of like the rent, the lights, you know, the heat, electricity, internet, phones, all of that. And a lot of funders will cap or not even allow indirect costs, unfortunately. So the expectation is that that's covered by your other fundraising sources. But if they do allow it, then you should definitely include that and just make sure that you're calculating it correctly.
So to kind of piggyback off of that, is your organization contributing? In what ways are they contributing? And then, do you have a partner in the project? So again, going back to collaborations, do you also have a funding partner? So, you know, a lot of the times we're balancing it out, asking, you know, this funder for, you know, basically the same project, but funding different aspects of the project, different items than another funder. Again, talking about, you know, if you need help working with a team and then creating your own budget versus using the funder's template. I love the funder's template. I hate creating a budget. It's terrible.
Yeah, no, I know. Can I just want to jump in? Like, I think one of the biggest issues that I see with budgets is that each cost is not like broken down. So sometimes you'll see like, and it depends, like there could be a funder who just wants to know like a broad overview, but generally speaking, funders want to know exactly what their dollars are going to fund. So the budget should be pretty detailed, you know, even down to the unit cost. So, you know, if you have a staff person that you're going to fund, you know, what's their, how much of their time is going to be applied to this project? So what you'd call a full-time equivalent. So FTE. If they're 50% of their time is going to be to the project, then you would write that down on a calculation. You'd say, you know, $40,000 a year at 0.5 FTE equals 20,000. You do the same thing for fringe benefits. You know, if you're going to be asking for funding for, you know, putting together a workbook, then you want to actually like, what's the unit cost that you expect with that workbook? So some of that is doing a little bit of legwork, you know, ahead of time, so that you can have those specific costs and unit costs so that the funder understands exactly what you're going to fund, rather than just saying, oh, we're going to spend 40,000 on salary and 20,000 on, you know, whatever it may be, but just really drilling down to what those costs are, how many of those things you're going to need, what's the hourly rate if you have a contractor, that kind of thing. So being as specific as possible and making sure each of those line items relates to the narrative directly, so that there's not a cost in the budget and the funder's like, well, why do you need this cost? It wasn't talked about. I don't understand, because it's not related to what you talked about that you need in the actual proposal itself. So just things to be careful of.
Yeah, and if there isn't a spot for some of these things, there should be a budget narrative where you can kind of explain and elaborate in a more narrative way on, you know, your needs. Okay, so proposal review process, you know, again, like Kelly mentioned, really making sure, you know, you have more than just one set of eyes on this. Spelling, grammar, you know, using Google Docs, there is Grammarly, and I'm pretty sure it's free. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you can use that for free, and it will really look at your grammar and kind of, you know, suggest some changes to you and things like that. Anytime you're seeing red squigglies and blue squigglies, please change it. And then a staff member, you know, takes over, determine if you have the capability, the capacity to deliver, if, you know, duplicative services. This should probably be done in the beginning of the process. So really when you're talking about, you know, applying for this funding, looking at, some of those basics. From staff to board, some boards read full proposals, others just staff summaries. I think it's important to present to the board the grants that you are applying for. That way they know, oh, I have a connection with, this foundation. If you're really struggling to get this grant, I can make a phone call and have that conversation, or any suggestions, if they want to review the grant, things like that. Corporate process, need to know who makes decisions. So typically, you have someone writing the grant, and then you're sending it off to the executive director or, the program director to review the grant. Sometimes it's one and the same, and it all depends on the organization. So really making sure that you have that oversight. And then the time frame. So what I like to do is get a grant done a week before it's due. That way you have the full week to review the grant, make sure that, it's good to go. And I like to submit it at least a day in advance because, things happen, right? Like you cannot control the world, especially now, with COVID, like somebody's out, you can't, get something done in time. So really making sure that, it's done at least a day in advance and you're submitting it then. Did you get the grant? I love Princess Bride, so I included this here. Okay, so after the decision, so you get the grant, right? So, you figure out, well, you're tracking the proposal. So you haven't gotten the grant yet, right? So you're tracking it. You got to figure out, when you will get the response by. Typically that will be listed on the funder's website, when they anticipate, a decision to you. And then if you haven't heard who follows up on the proposal, do you have any more questions for us? We're happy to answer any questions and elaborate. Sometimes funders will come back to you and ask you for additional information. And then you get the grant or you don't get the grant, definitely reply. Either way, thanking them, or, if you are denied, asking why. Sometimes funders will spend some time and talk with you about, ways that you could have improved upon in the application. Maybe it doesn't particularly match, what they wanted to fund, things like that. So, you did get the grant, say thank you, send an email, a card, handwritten card, that's always nice. And again, requesting feedback if you did not get the grant. Okay, grant proposal writing tips. So, always tell a compelling human story. Again, we talked about this, talking about, your success stories, videos, pictures, be clear and concise, avoid vague statements, really elaborate. Sometimes you can use bullets. In portals, it's a little bit hard to use bullet points. Same with charts. You might have to attach a chart if you have something like that, in aligning the budget with the narrative. So, listing costs that, are only explained, that are explained in the narrative, and costs that are necessary to achieve outcomes, just like, you know, we were discussing earlier, and making sure that the costs are allowable. Again, get started early. So, you know, let's say you have a grant that's due May 1st, you should get working on it. I'd say like February, March, you know, give yourself some time, because things come up, stuff happens.
I just want to say quickly just about that first bullet, because I think sometimes the tendency could be to talk about your organization and what your organization needs. And I would just encourage people to really just stay focused on the need that you're addressing and not the organization. Now, obviously you need resources to address that need, but just make sure that your proposal is focused on the need and the impact to your beneficiaries rather than necessarily the impact on your organization. Now, if it's a capacity building grant, you're going to talk a little bit more about what your organization needs, but at the end of the day, the goal is to be able to serve, you know, for example, serve more people or, you know, achieve XYZ outcomes. So, you know, just making sure that you're appropriately focusing on that need and not necessarily your own organization.
Right, exactly. Okay, mission creep. I would always say, you know, it's mission drift. And, you know, whenever I get presented something that's like that, I'm like, oh, that's a little drifty. It's just not. You know, you have a program where you're, you know, going to feed people, and kind of, you know, an extreme example would be, you know, oh, we're, you know, going to teach them how to read, right? Like that's not similar. But, you know, if you want to start a new program, that's something else. That's, you know, something that you need to talk about. But, you know, feeding, you know, I'm trying to think of like a drifty thing to that, but that's more of an extreme example. Unrealistic expectations, you know, grant writing isn't magic. There's no pot of gold. You know, grant funding is not going to solve an organization's financial sustainability issues for sure. You know, again, going back to kind of getting your ducks in a row, really making sure that, you know, you're working internally on your organization's issues, versus, you know, running out and, you know, seeking grant funding, thinking that that's going to change the problem. You kind of have to figure out how to do both at the same time, and it's a challenge for sure. Sending cold proposals, again, we talked about this. So, you know, reaching out to the funder first to establish a relationship. You know, unless it's otherwise on their website. Boilerplate proposals, so tailor each proposal to each funder's goals and interests. Again, I talked about, you know, kind of having that master Google document, or a document where, you know, you are writing out, you know, your mission statement, things like that, and just copying and pasting, but really making sure that you're tailoring that as you get into the application about the funder's goals and interests. And then maintaining funder relationships. So, you know, grant success is about developing relationships and mutual trust, really making sure that the funder's goals align with your own, and that your organization is going to be trusted in this community. So, you know, if you are getting the funding, that you're really being a good steward of that funding. So, you know, you're going to use that for what you said that you were going to use it for. You know, you're going to use all of the funding. Sometimes, you know, you get to the end and you have, you know, 80% of the funding left over. You know, really making sure that you're going to use that funding for what it was designed for. and that you understand the issues, you have good ideas about how to solve them, you're making that impact, you're showing the data that, yes, you did accomplish your goals. And that you can be trusted to perform and manage grant funds. This is going to be critical to whether or not you get future funding, whether it's from that funder or from different funders, and funders probably do communicate and, talk about, different organizations and ways that they can improve. So really making sure that, your reputation is staked on some of this funding. And that you're transparent and, willing to pivot when things don't go as planned. So we talked about a grant modification, a budget modification, a grant extension. So again, things happen, staff quit, you can't, fulfill the project goals in the amount of time that you said you would. Always reach out to the funder as soon as possible and let them know, here's what's going on. Feel free to ask for advice, but always come up with some kind of plan, on when you think that you will be able to fulfill the program requirements and spend the funds and time. And the biggest way to show your ability to be a good steward of the funding, as well as the impact that you have made, is through grant reports. So I love a good grant report. I love writing them because you're showing off, what you've been able to accomplish, the great work that you've done, whether you've made a reduction, in the problem, the amount of funding that you requested, you've spent the funds, the outputs, the outcomes that you've been able to accomplish. And, I know tracking mechanisms are challenging. So, a lot of nonprofits have a database. One client that I just worked with used Salesforce, for instance. Some of these are very expensive. So be sure to have some kind of tracking mechanism, and talk with your funders about, getting that established. Some of that is kind of, putting you don't want to put the cart before the horse. So really making sure that you have that tracking mechanism set up to track your outcomes and your data is key. And then ensure that your due dates are on your calendar for both interim and final reports. I like to use a Google Calendar, and then I will just share those dates with the relevant people. Work with appropriate staff to ensure that the program deliverables are executed and that funds are being spent appropriately in a timely manner. So really making sure that you're working with the program director. And, I like to have monthly grant meetings to talk about, if money is getting spent, if the goals are getting accomplished. And that way you can kind of track those grants, and make sure that, in the year's time, you have everything accomplished, rather than getting to the end of the year and, you kind of have your tail between your legs. So contact the funder early if you need a grant modification. We talked about that. And then communicate if you need ongoing support or continuation funding. If that happens, be prepared to discuss your sustainability plan. So, here's why, our sustainability plan that we initially, talked about in our grant application, why it, has failed or, is having issues. So, continuation funding, again, like I said, it's typically like they'll probably only give you another year's worth of funding, because again, foundations tend to not want to fund, multiple years in a row, many of them. And then funders don't fund activities, they fund trusted, competent partners to accomplish specific outcomes and impacts. And so Kelly, did this workshop many times. I actually sat in on Kelly's workshop many moons ago, where Kelly and Melissa gave this workshop. I think it was like, had to be 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago.
Not that long, but it feels that long.
No, really?
No.
My time frame is like just not, after having 3 kids, it's like gone.
And COVID.
And COVID, right?
Right.
Time is not our friend. Okay, so sorry, I just ran through all of that, but I see we have several questions.
We don't have any questions right now.
Oh,
So yeah, those are just things that are coming up.
okay.
Martha asked if most organizations have their own paid grant writer. And so I asked for other organizations to answer. So they are answering Martha's question right now. So I think the answer is some yes and some no. But keep answering Martha, because I think it's important for everyone to note that some do and some don't.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of that is depending on obviously the size and the resources of the organization, but you know, it's not, if you're a small not-for-profit, you know, or volunteer-led, it doesn't mean you can't apply for a grant if you don't have a professional grant writer on staff. You know, there's lots of resources out there to learn more about writing grants. You know, you know, there's too many probably to go through, and certainly, you know, workshops like this are helpful. I just think, you know, the main thing is to just understand what you're trying to accomplish and just be like very clear, and, you know, just make sure that you're looking for funders that are aligned, and start with your local funders if you're tackling a local problem. And, you know, certainly you know, we have a wonderful foundation community here who are, you know, very interested in being helpful and talking to, you know, all of you. So I don't, you know, you definitely shouldn't walk away thinking that this is daunting and that you can't accomplish it. And honestly, you know, if you apply and you don't, you know, you don't get a grant, certainly if you're able to get feedback, that just informs your process going forward. But, you know, that being said, if you do have the resources, it's nice to have someone on staff who can just focus on this, especially if you're a larger program, you know, you maybe have multiple programs, or you can attract funding that's not just local, you know, or you can hire a consultant and just pay for, you know, decide on what the scope of work is. Maybe they're just doing grant research for you, or maybe they're looking over proposals that you've already put together and giving you kind of guidance, or maybe they're doing the whole soup to nuts. But there's many ways to tackle it. And, you know, I think just about anyone is capable of putting together, you know, a foundation proposal. Certainly, when you start getting into federal grants, they get a little more complicated. But you know, that's a big learning curve that I do those all the time, and I'm still learning. So it's all dependent. But you know, definitely, you don't be afraid to go out there and try to seek grant funding.
All right. Any last questions? Well, quiet group all of a sudden.
Brain is full. One question I do have is, I had seen the CNY Foundation, the leadership program they had for new nonprofits. Now, I don't have a board currently, so I'm in the stage before that. So what is the best approach to getting some extra training on that? Like I mentioned in the chat, volunteer groups are a challenge, setting accountability and getting people to show up reliably. So that's about the stage I'm at, and I'd love some help on where to go for that exactly.
Yeah, I think you're referring to our leadership classroom.
Yes.
And that's for grassroots organizations. You don't have to be a 501c3 nonprofit to participate in that, but you do have to have a group. of people who are helping accomplish a goal. And Kiana Williams is our program officer, and she is on here somewhere, and she leads that effort for us. So if you would like to learn more about that, feel free to chat with Kiana.
Yeah, Carrie, just reach out to me. You got my contact, and I'll get you started with that. So
Oh,
yes,
great.
please. I'm so excited you're interested. That's
Yeah,
great.
because without a board yet, it's like, how can I get started? But how do I get the board? So
Yeah. So it's a really great program. It's led by two great facilitators, Beth Hassan of Interfaith Works and Beth Broadway of Interfaith and Hassan Stevens of The Good Life. So they have lots of hands-on activities. There's just so much, it's a great curriculum that can get you ready. So I'll send you some information and then we can go from there.
yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Melissa and Kelly. This was awesome.
The link for TLC is in the chat box, and anybody who wants to save links that have been put in the chat box, you can do two things. You could go ahead and just click on the link and it'll come up in your browser, or you can go to the three little dots to the side of the bottom of the chat box. There's a little paper, and then there's a little face, and then there's the three little dots. If you click on the three little dots, the top thing is save chat. So you can save the chat that way. And then you'll have everything that everybody said. So Kiana or Danielle, would anyone like to just mention the last few seconds of doing the events that we have coming up?
Yeah, the new sessions, we have one on May 19th, and that is all about our life needs assessment, which Kiana is also very intimately involved with. And that's being presented by Frank Rizzi and Mark King. And then we have September 8th, Plan Giving and Endowments, and that's with Tom Griffith and Christine Woodcock-Detter. We do still have some capacity to add new sessions, likely in the late fall. So again, if you have any ideas for those sessions, please contact me, whether it's for this year or next. I did get a couple of session ideas just from listening to the conversation, so stay tuned for more on those.
Can I add one more? The Black Equity and Excellence info session is next week as well. It is at the 27th from 12 to 1 if you want to learn more about that.
And the link for that is just in the chat box. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming, and thank you to our big round of applause for our Melissa and Kelly for presenting. And thank you to Danielle.
Thank you, Sarah, for making it all look so seamless.
And thank you to all of you for all the wonderful work that you're doing in the community. Really, it's nice to see you all.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Oh, Dara, you're on mute.
Everybody have a fantastic rest of your Thursday, and I'll send out an email with the PowerPoint slides and a video, and you have the gift of 15 extra minutes. So thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye, everybody. Okay. All right, you're muted. I'm gonna stop recording.